Hello everyone, and welcome to this video on the second part of naming ionic compounds. So today we're going to talk about how to name ionic compounds when they have multivalent metals or polyatomic ions included. So you are going to need for this lesson a piece of paper, a pen or a pencil, a periodic table, and also a polyatomic ion chart. These are on your class OneNote if you don't have a physical copy. They are also at the back of your workbook and textbook. So pause this video right now to get those things ready. Okay, welcome back. So there will be an assignment posted on Teams for you to do after this. And also listen to the password. You're going to enter it on the assignment so I can tell you listened to this video. Okay, so let's start with multivalent metals. Some metals can have more than one charge. These are called multivalent metals. So these are usually the transition metals. And here's an example. Chromium can be Cr3+ or Cr2+. So it can be a chromium 3 ion or a chromium 2 ion. And we need a way to tell which charge we're dealing with. So to distinguish between ions that may have different charges, we use a Roman numeral after the name of the metal. So for example, chromium 3+ is called chromium 3. The way you write it is chromium and then the Roman numeral for 3, which is III. And it's pronounced as chromium 3. Cr2+ would be chromium 2 and is pronounced chromium 2. So here's an example, chromium 2 oxide. Now instead of looking up the charge on the periodic table, we can actually tell the charge from its name. So chromium 2 is going to be chromium 2+. Remember, all metals are positive ions. And oxygen, we have to look at the periodic table and we see its ion charge is 2-. Okay, our charges are already balanced, which is great. So our formula is CrO. If we use copper 2 chloride, instead of looking up the charge on the periodic table, we get the charge of the species of copper from its name. So this is copper 2. So Cu2+. Chloride, I got to look at chlorine on the periodic table. There it is, it's -1. We need 2 chlorides to balance out the +2 charge of copper. So what's our formula going to be? It's going to be CuCl2. Okay, it's your turn. Pause the video and try to write the formula for these 4 compounds. Unpause the video when you're ready for the answers. Okay, how did you do? Let's look at the answers. Copper 1 chloride becomes CuCl. Nickel 3 oxide becomes Ni2O3. Cobalt 3 iodide becomes COI3. And titanium 4 selenide, this is a bit of a tricky one, becomes TiSe2. That's because selenide has a charge of 2+, so the titanium has, selenide is 2-, titanium is 4+, so we need 2 selenides to balance out the titanium. Here's another example, iron oxide. So now actually we're going to write the name from the formula. So here's oxygen. Oxygen has a charge of -2. Here's iron. Iron could have a charge of +3 or +2. How do we know which iron ion is in FeO? We have to do a little bit of math, but don't worry. We know there's one oxygen with a -2 charge. There it is. We also know there's one iron, and we know it must have a +2 charge to balance out the -2 from the oxygen. So here's our mystery iron. But there's only one of them, so it must have a +2 charge. Ta-da! So we would write this as, oh, it doesn't have it, sorry. We would write this as iron brackets 1 oxide. What about for iron 2O3 or Fe2O3? Okay, there's our oxygen again. It has a charge of -2. There's our iron again. It could be +3 or +2. How do we know? Again, we're going to use math. So there's 3 oxygens with a -2 charge. There they are. And we know that 3 times -2 is -6. We also know there's 2 irons, and we know they must add up to a charge of +6 to balance out that oxygen. So there's our 2 mystery irons. Okay, so we know we have to have +6. What's +6 divided by 2 irons? It must equal +3, right? 6 divided by 2 is 3. So we used the iron 3 ion here. So that would be written as iron brackets 3 III oxide. I'm going to show you some more examples. But iron 2 oxide is actually rust. So if you leave metal out and it gets wet, a reaction happens between iron and oxygen and turns into these smelly red spots that you might see on metal that you've left outside. Okay, so I'm going to get you to try writing the names of the following compounds. So press pause and press play when you're done. All right, how did you do? Let's look. So this CuI is copper 1 iodide. This PbO2 is lead 4 oxide, IV is 4. AuCl3 is gold 3 chloride. And Mn3P4 is manganese 4 phosphide. Great work. Okay, polyatomic ions. This one, you're going to need a chart, polyatomic ion chart. You do not have to memorize these polyatomic ions. You'll always have a chart to look at. So polyatomic ions are ions made up of more than one element. So for example, carbonate is CO3 2-. So there's a covalent bond happening between that carbon and those 3 oxygen molecules, but there's not quite enough electrons yet to make that stable. So that's why it has a 2- charge, because it wants to accept 2 extra electrons. Sulfate is another example, which is SO4 2-. Here's a table of some common polyatomic ions and their charges. Again, you will get this chart. You don't need to memorize them. The only one I want to draw your attention to is ammonium, which is the only positive polyatomic ion that we're going to work with in Science 10. Okay, so ammonium is NH4+. All the other ones are negative charges, so they're going to bond with a metal. Okay, so how do we write the names with polyatomic ions? It's actually pretty easy. You just have to write the name of the polyatomic ion just as you see it on the paper. Do not change the ending to IDE. So for example, CaCO3, we're going to recognize, hey, there's a metal at the front. This is an ionic compound with a polyatomic ion. So I'm going to look up Ca on the periodic table, and I find it's calcium. And then I'm going to look at my polyatomic ion chart. It is carbonate. CO3 is carbonate. Let's try this one. What's Na? Look at your periodic table. Number 11, that's sodium. And what's OH? That is hydroxide. I found that right from my polyatomic ion chart. How about iron? Fe is iron, and sulfate is on my polyatomic ion chart. I actually made a mistake here. Can you see it? Iron is multivalent, so that should say, it says iron sulfate, it should say iron 2 sulfate. Yes, that's true. I just looked it up. There should be a 2 there. Sorry about that. Okay, here's another one. NH4, that's our friend ammonia. Remember, ammonium. Ammonium is our only positive ion. Then I'm going to look at NO3. NO3 is nitrate. Ammonium nitrate. Okay, give it a try. Pause the video and see what you can do. Okay, how did you do? Let's have a look. NH4NO2 is ammonium. Oh, sorry, that should say ammonium nitrite. CaSO4 is calcium sulfate. K2CrO4 is potassium chromate. And FeCO3 is iron 2 carbonate. That's the mistake I made before. That's iron 2 carbonate. Okay, so those are names. Formulas, it's just the same as before. Identify the ions and their charges. Determine how many of each ion you need to balance the positive and negative charges. And use the subscript to write the formula. But this is the tricky part. If a polyatomic ion is getting a subscript, you have to put brackets around it. Just like in math, you need to use brackets to show that everything within the brackets is getting that number applied to it. So for example, if you want 2 NO3 minus ions, you write it like this, with a bracket and then the subscript. Not like this. That's 32 oxygens and 1 nitrogen. That's not right. So what's the formula for potassium carbonate? So the potassium ion is K+, the carbonate ion is CO3 2-. Think about balancing out the charges, and you'll see we need 2 potassiums to balance the -2 from the carbonate. There's our second potassium. Now our charges balance. So our formula is K2CO3. What is the formula for ammonium sulfate? So here's my ammonium ion, NH4+. Here is my sulfate ion, SO4 2-. We need to balance out those charges, so we need to add an extra ammonium. Now our charges balance, and our formula is NH4 2SO4. So please note the bracket here. Now it's saying we have 2 N's and 8 H's. You need that bracket, it's really important. Okay, last one for you to try. Pause the video and try writing the formulas. Press play when you're done. Okay, how'd you do? Ammonium sulfide is NH4 2S. Silver sulfide is AgSO3. Nickel 2-phosphate is Ni3PO42. And calcium hydroxide is CaOH2. All right, go ahead and complete the assignment on Teams.